Alright, good evening everyone. Hope you guys are enjoying your weekend so far. We're just gonna wait a few minutes here to let some more people file in, and then we'll get going in a few minutes here. Alright, so let's get started. Once again, good evening, everybody. Happy Saturday. Hope you guys are enjoying your weekend. So the Memorial Day weekend trip that I went on yielded quite a bit of new material. We've already gone over the stuff in the Memphis area that was filmed. We already covered all those roads. So now we're going to focus on what really was the flagship city of this trip from the very beginning, and that was St. Louis. I really didn't have any designs on making it down to Memphis, but the weather was so good and I couldn't pass up the opportunity to do so. But again, we already covered Memphis last week. If you missed the presentation from last week, it is up on my page, so you can go back and see that. So I won't need to recap anything from last week. It's already up on YouTube for you to see. St. Louis is one of the larger cities on the Mississippi River. It's not the largest, but it is one of the bigger metropolitan areas on the upper Mississippi River. And there's quite a lot to discuss with this city in particular. So let's get into it, shall we? So like Memphis, there are 4 main line routes in the interstate system. We have 44, 55, 64, and 70, and all 4 of those have really been mainstays throughout the course of the life of the interstate system in eastern Missouri. Although some of these routes have changed in length over the years, especially recently, so we'll try to cover some of those changes that have occurred within the last 10 years. I'm specifically talking about 44 through town and 70 around town. There are other 3-digit routes as well. There's 170, which runs a north-south alignment between the airport and the western suburbs. There's 270 and 255, which combine to make up the St. Louis Beltway. 270 is more to the Missouri side, 255 is more to the Illinois side. And then the state highway extension of 255 northward towards Alton is also a freeway that bypasses the Alton suburbs of Illinois. Other freeways we'll talk about briefly. The state highways 364 runs out through suburban St. Charles County, as does 370. And there's a short section of 367, which is actually, there's no page for that in tonight's presentation, but there is a short section of 367 between I-270 and US 67 that is also freeway grade. So like any other city, the freeways of St. Louis took shape gradually over the years. In the top left, we have a map from probably the late 1960s. You'll notice that there are no interstate highways mentioned on this map. You have over here US 40, 50, and 66 crossing into St. Louis at the Poplar Street Bridge. That's really the main point of emphasis here. US 40 will eventually become I-64 through Missouri. Here you can see on the right-hand map, a few years later, we have more things to see as far as the interstate system. 70 is largely in place, so is 55. 270 through Illinois and all the way down through Missouri is complete. You'll notice that the section of what is now 270 between I-70 in the north and I-55 to the south was originally numbered 244. This numbering was changed to make it a single route number later on. And at this point in time, 255 is not yet a thing over in Illinois. And what will become I-64 is under construction out from East St. Louis running eastward. And what will become I-64 is already in place and is signed as US 40 from the city of St. Louis on west. If we fast forward a few more years, we see that the change in designation has occurred. So this section of what used to be 244 is now numbered 270 to match the rest of 270 in the north of St. Louis and out into Illinois. I-44 is now in place through the west suburbs and into town. And the beginnings of I-255 are taking shape on the Missouri side of the Mississippi. The replacement of the Jefferson Barracks Bridge into an interstate facility has not yet occurred, so this is probably a late 70s map. The bulk of 255 was not built until the 1980s. As you can see, there's still none of it existent on the Illinois side of the Mississippi. Oh, and one other thing to note here, you also see 170 starting to take shape from the airport on up to its north end to 270 and working south to eventually what will be signed as I-64. And that's the extent of that interstate corridor. If we fast forward another 20 years or so, this is probably around the year 2000. Now you see I-255 is in place in Illinois. The state highway continuation of 255 runs north to bypass the town of Alton, Illinois. I-64 is now signed along US 40. So that interstate corridor is now a reality. I-170 is complete. So is Highway 370 through St. Charles. That was a freeway built in the 90s. The 364 corridor is starting to take shape, so that was not completed until very recently. So that is still a dotted line running through St. Charles County. And I-70 continues to wind through town, over the Poplar Street Bridge, and through downtown. And finally, here's the look today. It's not visible on this picture, but off to the left we have 364 complete, well out into St. Charles County. I-70 has been rerouted around downtown on the Musial Bridge. This was completed in 2014. And what used to be I-70 running through town beneath the Gateway Arch has been reassigned I-44. That's pretty much it. So that's basically the progression of how things were built in the St. Louis area. So if we go through these, I-44 is a major freeway through downtown. It begins at I-70 at the Musial Bridge, runs beneath the Gateway Arch, and then out into the west suburbs and beyond. If you were to follow I-44 from its beginning to its end, you would end up in extreme northern Texas. 44 does go through southern Missouri and out into Oklahoma. So it's a major corridor for traffic heading towards Oklahoma, the Red River Valley, and beyond. I like to call 44 I-64's dance partner through West St. Louis. The two highways do parallel each other quite closely for several miles from, say, the Midtown area on out towards I-270. They're not separated by that much. They both run east-west, but they're only separated by a couple of miles in some cases. But they are the two main feeder routes into town from the St. Louis County western suburbs. So originally I-44 ended where it meets I-55 south of the Poplar Street Bridge. And then this length was extended northward along the former alignment of I-70 once I-70 was rerouted over a new Mississippi River bridge that we will talk about in a couple of minutes here. So we come to 64, which was in place for a number of years, but it was signed as US 40. It was not originally part of the I-64 corridor when it was envisioned. In fact, I believe that most of the alignment of 64 in the state of Missouri is simply an overlap with US 40. It's a major corridor connecting St. Louis with the Ohio River Valley. So if you were to head east on 64, you'd end up in a place such as Louisville, Kentucky. The Ohio River Valley, Cincinnati is not far away from there. If you keep going, you'll end up in the good old mountains of West Virginia. It's one of 3 east-west interstates to serve St. Louis and St. Charles County as east-west routes. And again, this is the more recent addition as far as to the interstate system. There was a freeway in place since the 60s along most of this corridor. It was not signed as an interstate until much later, as it was gradually upgraded to federal interstate standards. And we'll see you tomorrow night. And the reason I bring up Jack Buck's name at this juncture is because the section of interstate within the city of St. Louis was ceremoniously renamed in honor of the legendary St. Louis Cardinals broadcaster in 2009. Which is kind of fitting because this interstate does pass right next to Busch Stadium. Of the 4 mainline interstate numbers, the only one that runs north-south is I-55. We touched on 55 a bit last week when we were talking about the Memphis area. 55 is part of that same corridor that begins up in Chicago, passes through St. Louis, down through Memphis, and on towards New Orleans. It's a very significant regional and long-distance corridor for travel and commerce in the midsection of the U.S. One of the more interesting features of 55 in St. Louis is the fact that in order to stay on 55, you have to navigate the Poplar Street Bridge, and you have to basically exit off of the bridge and navigate a 20-mile-per-hour advisory curve in order to stay on what is considered to be the main line. This interchange was addressed in the last couple of years with some improvements that were made to the Poplar Street Bridge, but it is still not exactly an ideal transition or ramp movement that you have to navigate. 55 also, in addition to running north-south through St. Louis County and the city of St. Louis, also provides access to Gateway Motorsports Park, which for those of you who are into NASCAR, IndyCar, that is St. Louis's claim to fame in those sports. By the way, this picture in the lower left shows that ramp transition on the Poplar Street Bridge. To stay south on I-55, you would keep to the left, and you notice the advisory speed here is 20 miles an hour, which is probably one of the lower advisory speeds anywhere on the interstate system. I mean, I don't keep track of these kinds of things, but I would imagine that that's possibly the lowest speed you will ever see on a mainline interstate. It's lower than the advisory speed for the the approach to the Memphis-Arkansas Bridge, where to navigate that Cloverleaf interchange, I believe the advisory speed there was 25. So this is significantly lower than that. I-70 is kind of like I-55 except in an east-west orientation. It's a major regional and national corridor for travel and commerce. Through the state of Missouri, it connects Kansas City with St. Louis, and if you follow it east from there, you'll end up in places like Indianapolis and Columbus. Where I-70 passes through St. Louis, it's roughly 850 miles from its eastern terminus in Baltimore, Maryland, and it's about 1,300 or 1,400 miles from its western terminus in Cove Fort, Utah. One of I-70's claims to fame in the St. Louis area is that the only express lane roadway in the St. Louis area can be found on I-70. And that is on approach to downtown for a few miles or so, between the Musial Bridge and a few miles west of there. Now, I-70 used to continue through town, beneath the Gateway Arch, and over the Poplar Street Bridge into Illinois. But there was discussions for years about a way of addressing congestion on that bridge. And so the solution that they came up with was to build a new bridge away from downtown and redirect I-70 traffic, the vast majority of which was long-distance traffic, not heading downtown. So they were able to remove that traffic from the city center and direct it onto a new bridge. And they found that in doing so, they cut traffic on the Poplar Street Bridge by about 20%. So that, combined with some of the upgrades that were made in recent years on the Poplar, have greatly improved the level of service of traffic for that bridge. So we've got the 3-digit interstates now. There are 3 of them. 170 is the one of the 3 that did not fully see the light of day as it was originally planned. As it stands today, it connects 270 and 70 and 64, 3 major east-west routes in St. Louis County with St. Louis International Airport, which is nice. However, it was planned as more of an inner loop freeway to connect also with I-44 and I-55. So if we go back to this map. So you notice how 170 comes down from Ferguson and down into Clayton and then ends at I-64, where the original idea was to route it further south still in this area, so that there was a connection to I-44 and to I-55 to basically create another inner loop, closer into the city of St. Louis. So like you have 270 that forms more of an arc. 170 was envisioned to be more of a straight line to connect the inner western suburbs of St. Louis County. So without that further extension southward to I-55, a lot of the original 170 proposal went unrealized. But as it is, it's a major highway that sees a lot of traffic. It connects the city of Clayton, which is a large population center in its own right within St. Louis County. Boeing also has a really large campus along the interstate just north of the airport. So this interstate is instrumental in connecting those areas as well. So I-270 is the Missouri section of the St. Louis Beltway. The Beltway is divided more or less into two halves, the Missouri section and the Illinois section, and they both more or less have their own interstate designation. There is some overlap between the states with these route numbers, but I like to think of the Beltway as a single highway where the Missouri section is 270 and the Illinois section is 255. It almost works out exactly, give or take a few miles. So the Missouri section of the bypass serves as a connection for the suburban communities of St. Louis and St. Charles counties out west of town. It's also a northern bypass, so if you're coming from the west on I-70, it is easy to skip the section of I-70 that runs through St. Louis proper by bypassing the city to the north on the Chain of Rocks Bridge. Also, it is a major feeder route connecting all the east-west interstates. So travel between 70 and 44 and 64 is made a lot simpler through this connection, this north-south outer bypass. So if we talked about the Missouri side of the loop, here's the Illinois side of the loop, which is I-255. It's the newest interstate within the St. Louis metro area. It was built largely in the 1980s. One of the more significant parts of building this freeway was the replacement and expansion of the Jefferson Barracks Bridge, which formerly carried US 50. It still does carry US 50, but they've added the interstate as of the 1980s. The original two-lane US 50 bridge was replaced with twin-span bridges, and we'll actually get a look at that in a minute. And they're named for the U.S. Army Jefferson Barracks, which are located just north of the bridge site. So I-255 runs between I-55 in Missouri and I-270 in Illinois. Beyond the end of the interstate is where the freeway continues. It retains its freeway characteristics, but it is signed as Illinois Highway 255. And the freeway bypasses Alton, Illinois, runs for about 20 miles beyond the north end of the interstate. To my knowledge, there's never been a serious move to have that signed as an interstate. It would have to have a different number from 255 because it wouldn't end at another interstate. Yeah, I think that's right. Bridge lover. I think they had a heck of a time with one of those bridges. I forget which one it was, but yeah, that sounds about right. I think that was a costly delay too. I think that held up the completion by about 2 years. So we have some freeways in the Missouri side of the metro that are state highways that are built to full freeway standards. The Page Avenue Freeway, Highway 364, is St. Louis area's newest freeway. It was finally completed in 2014. It's nice and wide. It's for the majority of its length, it's at least 8 lanes wide. Where it crosses the Missouri River, which is this photo on the right, it expands to about 10 lanes. One of the impetuses of building 364 was to do just that, to add more lanes across the Missouri River between St. Louis and St. Charles counties. You will know from past discussions with me that I love the idea of having more lanes available, especially across a body of water. The Missouri River being quite a barrier within the St. Louis metro area. So planners felt the need to add as many lanes as they could. So they built this bridge super wide with a lot of extra lanes for future traffic demands, without the need to have to address the lane count in future years. So by adding 10 new lanes to the system overnight, it opened up a lot more capacity. It added a lot more redundancy to the overall travel system, and it was quite an example of foresight on the behalf of engineers and planners. So the freeway ends at a point just past 270. There are conflicting accounts as to whether this is actually the intended eastern end of the freeway. It does appear that it could continue eastward via an upgraded Page Avenue corridor, but there don't appear to be any plans to bring this freeway any closer in to the city of St. Louis. .370 came into being in the 90s. It's basically another connection between I-70 and 270. It was again conceived as a means of adding lanes across the Missouri River. In the lower right corner here, we have the Discovery Bridge, which crosses the Missouri River. This is a twin span, 6 lanes across, 3 lanes per bridge. So this was another way to add a new bridge over the Missouri River and address capacity problems that had become evident in the late 80s. During its planning and construction, Missouri DOT did submit Highway 370 as an interstate. However, AASHTO said no. They reasoned, and rightfully so, that the 370 number doesn't work because it would connect with 2 interstates. It would begin at I-70 and end at I-270. AASHTO came back and said that they would accept an interstate corridor for 370 if it was renumbered to I-870. But since Missouri had already set aside the 870 number for what they would ultimately do an about face and sign as 255, Missouri DOT rejected AASHTO's counteroffer. So it remains a state highway to this day. There has not been any new movement towards assigning this an interstate number since then. Obviously, the 870 number is still available. It was never used for the the eastern section of the St. Louis Beltway. So they could go back and apply for a number designation if they wanted to, but the 370 number is now firmly entrenched in local media and in travelers, so I don't see a situation where the numbering is going to change anytime soon, if ever. So that was a rundown of the individual freeways in the St. Louis area. So if you guys have questions, comments, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can talk about them. Otherwise, I'm going to open up some video files and show you guys some stuff for a little while here. How's that sound? In fact, we can begin.
Lieutenant Governor Mike Hill is going to come on and talk about sort of more tornado recovery and floods, because that could be happening at any moment. So they're not done yet. So
Yeah, so one of the things that
some of the tarp around.
there were a couple of things that changed. You may recall that
All that work was not destroyed. I saw someone being interviewed today, basically in their.
I know, I did video on this trip, can you believe it? Sorry, I'm having something happened with my computer for a second. I don't know what the heck that was. Alright, so up until the relocation of the I-70 designation, you had I-70 going across the Poplar Street Bridge and then turning north upon entering St. Louis onto the freeway that we're on right now. And in 2014, when 70 was relocated, this section was reassigned as part of an extended I-44. So you can see the signage was changed to reflect that. So now the Poplar carries I-55 and I-64 only. I-44 now runs along the riverfront beneath the Gateway Arch, and I-70 now runs solo from East St. Louis over into North St. Louis.
And again, I'm not diminishing people suffering from flooding and saying, oh, but it is a fact that the rest of the country is drying up while we have copious amounts of water. We ought to figure out what to do with that.
I don't consider that flippant at all, and it's funny because I think there are people that feel like water is going to be maybe the most coveted resources in the future, but is there, because I haven't followed technology or ways to maybe capitalize on that if you are in the Midwest, because you're going to have demand for that in the future in places that don't have the adequate supply.
We have the best water in the world.
Well, and also it reminds us how many rivers we actually have here, and that translates into the work we're all supportive of on port authorities and things like that. We are a major transportation hub because of air, rail, and water.
Is anybody having issues with lag on this thing?
I'm
not sure what's going on with this.
Are always working on rivers and how do you control the rivers, and I know they're always fighting with the Corps, and you got to keep these rivers open, but you also have to let floodplains be floodplains, right? So you don't develop in them. So it's a complicated ecosystem.
But what if we, and I don't know what this would cost, but what if we started in some of those, maybe in the floodplains, I don't know where, but what if we started building lakes where the water...
Amphetamine on the streets of St. Louis. Assistant U.S. Attorney Tom Ray says if he even suspected you might be talking to police about him, he could have you killed.
Dion Gatling ordered the hits of two individuals who he believed not only had information about the drug trafficking organization and his activities, but he believed would also cooperate with law enforcement.
If Gatling's reign made people
Yeah, I'm
afraid to
having
testify in
issues
court,
with
Ray
lag
is
on my
hoping
end
his
too. I'm not
sentencing
sure.
sends a signal that you can't order hits
Not sure
on
what the reason
justice
is for
system
that.
itself and get away with it. Kevin Killeen, St. Louis's News Radio.
Yeah, this is the only section of express lane in St. Louis Metro. It's for about a 5 or 6 mile stretch of I-70 between the north suburbs and or from the west side of the city and right in through downtown. The lanes were originally built to be reversible, but somewhere along the way they became just a one-way roadway, with them being open to inbound traffic only. And the change appears to be permanent because there's no way to get on the lanes going outbound, and the access points to go outbound are blocked with Jersey barriers. Yeah, this is a weird roadway. Missouri DOT has looked into removing these lanes and just restriping all the way across with general lanes, but I guess they feel like it helps with the flow of traffic in the morning to leave it the way it is. So if it's advantageous to have one direction of peak flow benefit from it, then I guess it's better to leave it as it is. Well, the reason there's no white stripe on the right is because these are technically reversible lanes still. So what is the right lane going eastbound in the afternoon could be swung around to be the left lane going westbound. So then it would make sense. But again, these lanes haven't been reversed in years. I'm not even sure the last time they were used for outbound traffic. As you can see in the video, there's not a lot of company in here. So I basically had the roadway to myself all the way into town.
The program at Total Financial Freedom can help you get debt-free in months instead of decades. Get off the debt treadmill and stop the harassment. Get free of.
But yeah, this is something of an oddity. It's the only roadway of its type in St. Louis.
Call now at 800.
And it was the only roadway of its type that I encountered on the whole trip. So they don't have anything like this in Memphis.
They're A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau too. Get off the endless cycle without having to declare bankruptcy. You'll have the right to settle your debt for a mere fraction of what you owe. Call Total Financial now at 800-899-8922.
Yeah, Tampa did their express lanes in Grant style. They had to build theirs on an elevated viaduct, which was very cool. And that was one of those video series that I was very glad to pay the toll for, because that was a fun drive.
Back with the man who sat in this chair for many years, and many of you are still asking about.
So we're coming up on downtown, and at this point, I-70 is about to split off to go over the Mississippi River, and the lanes end here as we transition onto the main line of I-44 westbound.
Doing a lot of really excellent work covering the news for us here at KMOX during the week, and the reason bringing you in this morning, obviously, is the tornadoes in Jefferson City. You were over there, and I just wanted to get your impressions. What are they dealing with in Jefferson City as we deal with day 3 now, I guess it is?
Yeah, boy, I tell you, they've got a lot of cleanup to do, a lot of rebuilding.
Notice on the left the Jersey barriers that were put down. That was where you were going to access the express lanes if you were going outbound from the city. So it looks like there's not going to be any traffic flowing outbound on those lanes anytime soon. This is a neat trip through the town. As we come up on the Gateway Arch, we pass by the Dome, which was formerly the home of the St. Louis Rams NFL team. And we transition to a below-grade freeway at this point. We'll pass underneath the park, which is the main entryway into the Gateway Arch area. There's a couple of bridges here. There's this one right here.
You got a lot of businesses that have to rebuild, and then you've got a lot of homes and apartments that need to be rebuilt.
So those bridges carry traffic over to the Gateway Arch. There's no access to the Poplar Street Bridge from I-44 westbound, as you can see.
You always look for a silver lining to the cloud.
That bridge is flying overhead right now.
The fact fact that there were no fatalities borders on the miraculous.
And we transition back to an elevated structure.
An overnight tornado.
We pass right beneath the old Macarthur Bridge,
They might not hear the sirens,
and we approach the split for
and yet,
I-44 and 55 south of town.
from that standpoint.
Oh, definitely, and that's just a miracle. I mean, when you look at the damage, especially in those apartments and the top floors, hats on, and you'd hear stories that I talked
So the
about
Macarthur Bridge
because the power was cut
um,
off, not because he heard the sirens or anything
used
like
to be a
that.
double-deck structure. They removed the upper level of it
And, you know, if you
a few years ago, so now it's exclusively a railroad bridge.
stories like that,
The upper roadway used to carry automobile traffic,
ripped in half.
but that hasn't been the case for many, many years. And in fact, if I do my separate presentation on the bridges of the Mississippi River, we will talk more about the Macarthur Bridge and sort of the history of that.
35 cents a day. Your rate is guaranteed, and they'll help you get started 4 hours a day. Go online at
The one bridge I can show you, whether we do the presentation on the Mississippi River bridges or not, is the Stan Musial Bridge, which is the new alignment of
at your service.
I-70 across
Heating and cooling.
St. Louis and across the Mississippi River. This bridge was built in 2013, opened to traffic a year later. It is St. Louis's contribution to the signature span movement, and I would say that they did a fantastic job with it.
Yeah, hi Mike, how you doing?
I'm very good, and you?
Oh, excellent. All right. Hey, I got I guess
This bridge has one of the longer cable-stayed spans in North America, which is, it's fairly deceiving. It doesn't, when you drive it, it doesn't look like it's that long or that big. It's deceptively big.
be gone, and with the liquid.
And it is quite beautiful at night when they light it up.
Will this kill just the flower, or
This bridge is named for St. Louis Cardinals Hall of Famer Stan Musial.
is it just going to kill
Nicknamed Stan the Man. He's probably the greatest position players in Cardinals history, in the conversation for greatest Cardinal of all time. This bridge is affectionately known by locals as the Stan Span,
Very few, and I can't think of
and it's been known as such ever since it opened.
let's say an herbicide that would kill the plant and also the seed at the same time. So it won't get rid of the seed, but it'll get rid of the plant, flower, and everything else. So then consequently, you'll be left with the seeds that have already been formed by the plant, but it should stop any
I did do the walk on the old Chain of Rocks Bridge. I have pictures of that I'll show next week for the bridges presentation.
Your mic, I've been pretty smart.
You aren't kidding. You're going to be taking over the show.
Hey, I thank you for my call.
On this bill. It raises an interesting
Amendment rights we're talking about. No one should be forced to support a cause they disagree
Yeah, I do not have night videos of St. Louis. I did not
ShowMeInstitute.org.
have the time to do those.
St. Louis. KMOX.
And by the way, now's a good time for me to just remind everybody that all the video material that you're seeing right now is probably not even going to make it onto YouTube until close to the end of the year. So, yeah, this is a good time. If there's something you want to see in St. Louis now, now's a good time to get your request in, because it's not going to be a mainstream thing on YouTube until I have time to upload it, which, you know, at the rate I'm going, you know, we finish Hawaii in June. We start California at the end of June. We're probably going to be doing California through September. So that would mean that October is the month where you would start to see some of this stuff come out. So, now's your chance to kind of get in on and see some of this stuff. And if you do follow my Facebook page, I will be doing previews of all this material as well. That's what I've been doing. So I can spend more time on my Facebook page going in depth because I have unlimited time. So I can get into more of the stuff that I covered over there than I can over here on a YouTube live stream. This is I-55 northbound as we enter the city of St. Louis. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. Alright, this is a good place to pick up. So as we approach the merge with I-44, on the right is going to be the famous Anheuser-Busch brewery in St. Louis. And then we'll merge with I-44, and then we'll approach the Poplar Street Bridge from the south. Yeah, I would agree. I think of all the bridges in St. Louis, the Poplar is probably the least imaginative. It's the least interesting. They certainly could have done a lot better as far as, coming up with a good-looking design than what they ultimately built. When I was in St. Louis, I got video of all of the bridges that are open to automobile traffic, from the Clark Bridge in Alton all the way down to Memphis. The one exception being the Mlk Bridge, which is closed for a major reconstruction project, which Illinois DOT has recently come out and said that that bridge will not be open again this year. So the work on that will not finish until next year. Which, for those of you who are keeping track, that bridge was originally supposed to reopen in July, and now they've come out with this bombshell that the bridge will not be ready to carry traffic again this year. So I don't know what's going on with that project, but obviously something went haywire along the way. So here we are on 55 North. The Macarthur Bridge is on the right, as you see. And we'll transition onto the Poplar heading outbound into Illinois. This curve is not nearly as bad as the curve to go south on I-55, the 20-mile-an-hour curve. This one's a lot more reasonable. This bridge opened in 1967. A major reconstruction project was completed in the last few months that saw the bridge expand in capacity by a lane. We also saw improvements made to the southbound ramp movement on I-55. So it's a much better bridge than the one that was existent, say, 10 years ago. Okay, so we enter Illinois at this point. that's it for that video. Now, if you're coming from East St. Louis and you want to go south and you want to stay on the main line of I-55, this is the kind of trip that you would see. I-70 takes off to the right to go over the stand span. There's a ramp on the left to go east on I-64 if you want to head towards Kentucky. And we're going to continue straight at this point. Now, these are the ramps to the Mlk Bridge, which are closed because of the construction going on the access ramps to the bridge on the Illinois side. These are the ramps that are causing the holdup in the reopening of the bridge. You can see there's a lot of construction activity up ahead on the hill. They basically tore down whatever ramp used to be there, and they're building a new ramp in its place. So that's what the holdup is. And somewhere along the way, that project got way far behind schedule. Now, this is always a point of confusion with drivers. The main lanes of 64 and 55 split into parallel two-lane roadways in either direction. And the reason this happens is so that the interstate can pass beneath a pre-existing railroad bridge, which we will encounter as we make this turn towards the Poplar. This is that railroad bridge. So after that happens, the lanes re-merge, and we now cross the Mississippi. This video takes you along the main line of I-55, so we're going to make that right turn onto the ramp. And I'll show you what that ramp is like. This is the 20-mile-an-hour ramp that I'm talking about. So here's the exit, and then this ramp is very generous in that it gives you two lanes to stay on I-55. This is quite a sharp curve, and it's on a downhill grade, which is probably the main reason why it's posted at 20 miles an hour. So then once we get through that curve, we're back on the mainline freeway, and we fast approach the split with I-44, and this is where we left off last time. I have to say that the Eads Bridge is probably the least interesting bridge from the deck. There's not a whole lot to see up there. So, yeah, I got video of it, but it's not a very exciting trip. There's not a whole lot to see up there.
He said, I want to say something to the consumer panel. I want to tell you that we can provide to you an
This video
annuity that
begins
will
in East
give
St.
you
Louis
6%
and
per year
takes you into town.
every year between now and when you retire. And then when you do retire, I will give you 5.5% of income from the value of your account, and we will give you the 5.5% for as long as you live. Answer him when the host of the event interrupted me and said, I'm sorry.
So the Metrolink is running up ahead on the upper left, and it's going to transition to the lower level of the bridge, and we're going to travel inbound into the city on the upper level. This roadway was rebuilt and redone about 15 years ago. It was closed to vehicle traffic for a number of years, and then the Metrolink was routed onto the lower deck of the bridge, and then the roadway was eventually rebuilt. I believe the roadway re-entered service in about 2003.
So in theory, think about this. Wouldn't that sound great? You're going to give me a guaranteed 6% annual return. Think about what you're getting in your bank account. You're not getting 6% of your bank savings account to your CD. You're getting 1%, 2%, maybe 3%. Look at this.
The one good thing about the Eads Bridge is that this is a very neat entrance into the city. There's I-44 running ahead, or overhead.
Into an income stream equal to 5.5%.
Yeah, we did all of the bridges on the Missouri River that were part of the freeway system. So I-64 is one of them. The bridges on 70 and 364 and 370, we also did those.
Are you kidding me?
I think it was a gallon of so, but, I mean,
Hey, I need your help. My husband told me that WW
getting a brand, seeds on it or something like that, or landscape and that, and sprinklers. Existing bed spaces.
Questions people had, particularly about the
Well, thank you. It's greatly
to be okay to cut the sticks out of them.
cut those out. So just an organic product. Please call organic herbicide. Yeah, I do like and vinegar, natural vinegar, and I mean that's
A question. I have a Woodfilia bush.
Yeah, here's the I-64 bridge. The original bridge that was built in the 30s was replaced. This project took place in the last 10 years. So we're driving on the new bridge, which carries eastbound traffic. The second bridge built was reconfigured and now carries westbound traffic.
Can I cut that out? Is that going to destroy bush?
no. You get rid of it. See, dead wooding, whether it's on trees or on shrubs or anything else, that's always the wise thing to do because it'll be an
I
imitation.
think I'll show you the other connection here.
We're 293.
At the upcoming classes through the SEL Learning Center.
Or you're getting prices on a new jet for the summer.
If I can find it.
Seating is limited, so call today.
Lion King, remember from that movie? That's the chemistry. Disney, I love Tim Allen, lived
their high
There it
school
is.
existence. So they decide, this is a little gimmicky, to put it all on the line and party.
The original 1930s bridge was over on the right,
The director here, actress
and
Olivia
then
Wilde,
this
never
bridge
done
for
that
the
before.
longest time carried
Soundtrack, the cast,
eastbound
local
traffic.
locations,
And they built the new bridge to the south to carry relocated eastbound traffic. This bridge was basically flipped around to carry westbound. So you have two spans now, each carrying 4 lanes of traffic.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's funny, it's intelligent, it's heartfelt, it is anything but predictable. It takes some real interesting turns here. And this Beanie Feldstein, I'm telling you, I've always said, I wish I could buy stock in young actors, musicians, people that you see coming onto the scene that you know are going to be big stars. She is so funny. There's great...
I suppose we can run through the bridges of the Missouri River that I covered, since those aren't part of the presentation on the Mississippi River. So this is the 370 bridge. This is known as the Discovery Bridge. This was built in the 90s as part of the 370 freeway. It's not typical that you see recent bridges get built as truss bridges. Usually they're built as some other concoction. But that is an example of a relatively recent truss bridge. So that is the Discovery Bridge. Down here on Highway 364.
Password protected. Your every move could be exposed to cyber criminals and companies that'll track and sell your information. You're exposed, but no window coverage.
This bridge is nice and wide. It's got 10 lanes.
But now there's a way to pull down the blinds on cybercrime.
If I remember correctly, this is the only bridge that has lane control devices on it.
Security experts. Norton Secure VPN is a
And you can see them above
virtual
the roadway at intervals.
your online privacy.
It's another twin span bridge.
Or the coffee shop.
St. Louis has a thing for building twin span bridges.
Activity is totally encrypted. To get Norton Secure VPN, go to norton.com/VPN, starting $3.33 a month with an annual subscription. That's norton.com/VPN. Terms apply.
Hi, I'm Kyle Cox, owner of Blindster.com. At Blindster, we offer custom-made blinds, shades, and shutters at affordable prices. Since I founded Blindster in 2010, my mission has been to convince people they can install custom window treatments themselves to save a lot of money.
Okay, so that's that one.
Tell everyone.
Let's see.
And you just want to get your fix, don't.
We go to also beer and a ball that nice.
Exciting. I mean, I think we.
It's on. Finally, Ryan. And now, and Sheriff King Siren and firm estimate online. MOX. Mike Brad, welcome after 8 weeks. And the main
Here's the
question
bridge on
I think
I-70.
is,
Again,
where
another
is this
twin
going to go,
span
and how far is this
crossing.
going to go?
When you look at it from the legal perspective, does this make it to the Supreme Court, or does it even not get that far?
It probably will, George, but a lot has to happen before then. First and foremost, this bill and this law now that the governor signed this into law yesterday, it doesn't take effect until August 28th.
All of these bridges are
But it
very,
won't really take effect even on August 28th
substantial in
because there will be
size,
legal challenges filed
but they are
challenges
next to
that
impossible
any
to
judge
photograph. There
that's
just
come
are not
before
any
will
good
issue a restraining order keeping
places
this law from taking effect
to
on August 28th.
photograph these
So
bridges
even though it has been
when the
signed
river
into
is at
law,
normal
it won't
depth.
actually
And now when the
take
river
effect
is at
until
major
it
flood
moves through
stage,
the
as it
court
was
process.
and still
And these are
is,
the kind of things that take years, correct?
the few locations that you might be able to get a decent view of these bridges from are flooded out. So I didn't have any luck trying to get any pictures of these other than what you see from the roadway.
And then once it gets through the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, it could go.
I think that was it. I think that covers all of the all the Missouri River bridges. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, the Missouri has been a major flood stage for weeks now, and I think it's actually the river is actually higher now than it was when I was in town over Memorial Day weekend. I know that's true of the Mississippi River. Mississippi is about 4 feet higher than it was over Memorial Day weekend. And at the time, the Mississippi was about 12 feet above flood stage. So the river continues to rise even at this juncture. And just to give you some perspective, at St. Louis, the depth of the river is 46 feet, or it's going to crest at 46 feet over the weekend. In the Great Flood of 1993, the crest was 49 feet. So we are experiencing one of the greatest crests in recorded history right now. So good luck trying to get pictures of these bridges down by the river, because there's no, unless you have a drone with you, there's no way that you can get anywhere close. And one of the symptoms of the flooding is that roads like US 67 are restricted as far as their traffic. The southbound roadway is underwater as you approach the Clark Bridge. So two-way traffic had to be put on the northbound lanes, which are built significantly higher above the river. In fact, I went through Alton about 48 hours before US 67 was shut down through Alton because of the rising river. And I was through Chester, Illinois, doing video of that bridge, within a matter of days before that bridge had to be shut down because the Missouri approach to that bridge is underwater. So there are major disruptions, both locally and regionally, with the flooding that's going on in the Midwest right now. Yeah, I-29 was shut for a while. It reopened for a period of time, but is now closed again between St. Joseph, Missouri and Omaha, Nebraska. So this is the Clark Bridge of PBS documentary fame. They made a movie about the construction of this bridge, and it sits proudly in my library today. This is a wild looking bridge, isn't it? And when we do our talk on the bridges of the Mississippi River, we can get into more detail about the design and the means and methods involved with the construction here, but it was definitely a unique undertaking. What else you guys got for me? Anything? Oh, and by the way, you can kind of sort of see off to the right at the end of this video where the southbound lanes go. It's now a lake, basically. So there won't be any traffic over there for a while. And part of the construction of the new Lewis Bridge over the Missouri River and the new Clark Bridge over the Mississippi was the construction of those new northbound lanes that were much higher above the floodplain, so that you wouldn't get a total closure of US 67 in the event of a flood. You have to carry two-way traffic, but at least the road can stay open to some degree. Could show you that. Let's see. That's in the Illinois section. Yeah, so the Chain of Rocks Canal Bridge has been reconfigured to a single lane of traffic on the left here, and there's a sidewalk or a walkway on the right. And this conversion, I guess, was done in the last few years. I don't remember reading about it on any of my sources, so it must be a relatively recent change. And this bridge was, along with the old Chain of Rocks Bridge, part of US 66 for a period of about 20 years or so, before US 66 was rerouted further south and it crossed the Mississippi at the Poplar Bridge. Speaking of Chain of Rocks Bridge, I'll show you what they did on 270 leaving Illinois. 'Cause this was a surprise to me. I didn't know that this project had occurred. I assumed that when I was going to cross the Chain of Rocks Canal, it was going to be on the twin span cantilever bridges. But lo and behold, those bridges were replaced. They don't exist anymore. So we're instead crossing the Chain of Rocks Canal on a brand new girder bridge, which I presume was completed around 2015. And so this is a brand new roadway, which I was not expecting to encounter.
We have over 200 Volvos to choose from, and always the superior service you've come to expect. Check out our complete inventory online at wcvolvocars.com. That's wcvolvocars.com.
So the last bit of research I did leading into this trip was, using websites that made reference to the twin span cantilever bridges. So there was no mention of this new project. So I was quite floored when I came up on this and saw that everything was completely different.
Has an exclusive charter France cruise on the Rhone and Somme rivers with a 2-night post-cruise stay in the French Alps. This is June of 2020. Call for a detailed brochure because it includes early discount booking. Sunrise does the most amazing job.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the fact that they replaced the bridges. I don't really like what they replaced them with. They could not have built a bridge with less character than the replacement bridge over the canal. And the bridge over the Mississippi isn't much better as far as having character. It's right up there with the Poplar Bridge as far as being quite uninteresting.
Oh, yeah, so my wife's got these little green earplugs that she puts in.
And she doesn't like them. They're uncomfortable. And she's not happy with the amount of snoring that's taking place next to her. And I'm fearful that getting to a certain age, Kelly, I would have no idea if I can get through before long. I have no idea if I snore. Yeah.
So this is the chain of rocks bridge over the Mississippi.
I'm sure I do.
You notice that while the lanes are regulation width, there are no shoulders on either side. This bridge was built in about 1967.
So important in everything we do in our lives. We are joined on the KMOX guest line.
And I gotta think that this bridge is something of a bottleneck along the 270 corridor, and that one of these years they're gonna address this bridge. If they could address the twin cantilevers over the canal, then they can certainly address this one.
Oh, I do snore occasionally, sure. So what is snoring? What causes snoring?
Snoring is an easy thing to understand. It's just turbulent airflow. So the example we use for folks is if you think about water going through the trap under your sink, that noise of the water is turbulent water flow. So all snoring is turbulent airflow.
Okay, we enter Missouri. Briefly enter the city of St. Louis at that point for about half a mile, and then you enter St. Louis County beyond that. Airport Access Road. Yeah, let's do that. St. Louis Lambert International Airport is one of the larger hubs in the Mississippi Valley. It's got convenient access to Interstate 70, right near the interchange with I-170. And this is a weird access road in that it's not fully access controlled. So there's a traffic light right here that we're gonna skip because I sit at this light for a while. There's no reason for this light to be this long. By the way, the Metrolink rail is running above us. That's the same line that eventually takes you into downtown and across into Illinois on the Eads Bridge. And we get to travel right beneath that corridor on this little access boulevard. Okay, so this is this is one of the terminals.
More important, so 3 times the diameter of the roof ball, but only about 80% as deep. So you don't need digging a deep hole is not going to necessarily help all that much. Okay. All right. Well, I'll try to make the circle a little bigger around these trees, circumference a little bigger, and then put in more topsoil and see what I can do. Right.
What else do you guys want to see? Anything?
Absolutely. You know, about 20% of the roof ball.
As I said, unless you're following my Facebook page, this might be your only chance to see some of this stuff until the fall. So that's likely when this stuff is going to make it onto YouTube.
All right, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Sure. Yes, folks.
And even then, I may not even upload everything from St. Louis, and you may get stuck with a best of series.
A lot of plants are
Because
turning yellow.
by the end of September, I'm going to have the St. Louis stuff lined up. I'll have Memphis lined up. And then there's going to be the stuff that I'm filming the first week of July. The first 10 days of July, I'm going to be very active in another mystery metropolitan area. So there's going to be that stuff too. That's going to be fighting for airtime. So I guess the point being that I may not get to... Oh, I forgot I did this. That's funny. So the point being that we may not even get to upload everything from St. Louis. I may have to upload some stuff and then leave the rest for later. But we'll see how that works. I'll probably leave the rural stuff off, which is typically what I've started doing. Like if it's rural in material, rural in nature, then I'll just save it for some other time. I've already been doing that for a number of interstate corridors I've logged a lot of miles for. I would say that interstates 55 and 70 outside the metro areas are prime candidates to receive that treatment as well. So it'll help as far as prioritizing the suburban and urban material so that you can get, you know, all the city stuff out of the way. Yeah, on this trip I flew in and out of Columbus, Ohio, so I drove all of I-70 between Columbus and St. Louis, so all of that stretch of interstate was added in video. So I now have video of I-70 from Baltimore, Maryland, all the way out to Wentzville, Missouri, which is where I-64 comes in, about 20 miles west of St. Louis. That's about 870 miles of continuous coverage of that interstate. Only 1,300 miles to go.
And on this basis, they destroyed the lives of American citizens, Lee. And you're right. Are you looking forward to seeing all this stuff come out?
Well, as you know, I-70 has a
released
rather
across the world?
unglorious
I really
end
am, and I think that
at
the
the
involvement of
city
a lot of
line
our
in Baltimore,
Five Eyes
so
intelligence partners like Dearlove, which you've
that's
alluded
basically-
to, and that's
Yeah.
going to be probably far more
that's
extensive.
basically it. I mean, there's that
that's a
little
bit- that's a bit
continuation to the
sideways.
park and
When you
ride
say
lot, but
Dearlove as if he's like Madonna, that's actually
that's the
Richard
only
Dearlove.
section of I-70
Who was a
that was ever
long-time
built inside
head
the Beltway.
of MI6. He's basically a 4-decade career spook in London.
I'll show you 170 because this is a
large
neat,
part of this counterintelligence surveillance of the Trump campaign
somewhat
was
urban
outsourced.
freeway
That's
drive.
when you're,
The
referring
interstate
to
begins
Richard
here
Dearlove.
at I-64 in the city of Clayton.
Yeah, okay.
And there are some high rises in Clayton, which surprised me. This is quite an impressive
What were you saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
city
well, I
here.
think that these documents get declassified and out there in the public domain where we can kind of comb through them, that the connections with some of our Five Eyes partner like Sir Richard Dearlove and Joseph Mifsud, if he turns up again, not to mention Christopher Steele, of course, and it is going to be far more extensive than any of us had thought. When the left, again, back to your original point, when the left...
Well, there's video of all that part of I-70 through Maryland and Pennsylvania. There, it just hasn't been uploaded yet. It's sitting in the same folder that all the other rural material is that I haven't had the chance to upload. So that's why you don't see any of that.
Whatever the Dems are accusing the GOP of is what they're doing. Lots more.
I mean, I'll upload it eventually. I mean, if it's good enough to make it to the catalog, it's good enough to make it to YouTube. The problem is I'm doing an awful lot of traveling nowadays, so the urban stuff is being fast-tracked. So the city of St. Louis, the city of Memphis, the mystery cities I'm going to cover in July, those are going to be at the front of the list. They're going to basically cut the line to the front because I want to make sure that everybody's getting the urban stuff. And the urban stuff is really what hits the spot with most of my viewers anyway. So I tend to think that people would rather see the urban stuff like this material over, you know, miles and miles of cornfields in Ohio and Indiana. I know that's what I would rather see if I was a fan of this channel. So just trying to give you guys more of the feel of the more active sections of the interstate system right away. And you know, when we fall on lean times and I'm not traveling as much anymore, then that'll give me plenty of opportunity to go back and show you the more uneventful sections of the interstate system that I've traveled over the years.
I can make you an oral appliance so your sleep sounds more like this. I have over 95% success with oral appliances.
Well, you know, some people do prefer that.
All over Missouri and Illinois.
Some people do like cornfields. Ask the people in Iowa.
I had Dr. Smith make me a sleep appliance over 5 years ago.
But I'm from New York. I'm used to the fast-paced, you know, urban stuff with a lot of action involved. So that's what I like to see.
Call Dr. Smith at 618-466-9387.
Yeah, the section of 70 in Pennsylvania around Breezewood is part of that backlog. There's a lot of stuff in Pennsylvania I haven't uploaded either. I have every mile of interstate in Pennsylvania cataloged, but it just, I do not know when I'm going to get to upload that stuff. So that's 70, 81 from Maryland on up into the Scranton area was put on video last year. I already gave you 80. I gave you 99. I think I gave you most of 79, although I finished out 79 down into West Virginia. So that piece of it hasn't made it onto YouTube yet. And then there's huge sections of 70 that are on catalog, but they just haven't made it. They haven't seen the light of day yet. So there's a lot of 70 in Maryland that is not on YouTube yet. There's a section in Pennsylvania I mentioned that isn't up yet. The vast majority of it in Ohio, even though every mile in Ohio is on video, very little of it is actually on YouTube. And it's the rural sections east of Columbus and west of Dayton that are not on YouTube yet. And then again, same thing with Indiana. You know, every mile of 70 in Indiana is on video now. But again, outside of Indianapolis metro area, that stuff hasn't seen the light of day either. And I would imagine the same thing will be true with all the mileage in Illinois. Outside of East St. Louis, I don't see a situation where that'll get uploaded anytime soon. Yeah, the Indiana Toll Road was not part of this trip. I mean, I've been on, what? I guess that's like 13 miles of it or so. Like from I-69 to the Ohio border, that's the only section of it I've covered. So the ITR was a little bit out of my range on this trip.
The abortion bill is now abortion law. KMOX news time is 12 o'clock. It is sunny and 85 degrees downtown at the Arch. The full forecast in...
So we just passed I-70 on I-170 northbound, and we've got about 3 miles until the terminus at I-270, so we'll finish this out, and then we'll move on to a different video after this. So you can get your video clinch of I-170 in Missouri. You guys want some hints as to where I'm going in July, don't you? Yes, it's a trip I'm very excited about. It's been in the works for years, actually. It was a trip that I thought about taking as early as 2012, in fact. But it was a trip that never had the chance to materialize. And really the spark that made this trip happen was a family event that I'm going to be attending out in a particular metro area. Or it's not in the metro area, it's a bit of a distance outside of it. But it's close enough to where I can swing that event, you know, spend some time with family, and then while I'm out there, I'm going to have a few days to travel around. So I should be able to knock out quite a bit. Plus, it's going to be happening over the 4th of July weekend, so there won't be too much traffic to deal with. I'm hoping that the traffic gods are kind to me again, like they were over Memorial Day weekend. You know, it's one of those cities that I've actually wanted to do for a long time, as I mentioned. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. I'm not going to tell you guys where I'm going. I'm going to let you guys guess. And then on or around July 1st, I'm going to post a picture from this city. And you guys are going to be like, holy cow, he's in this city. Wow, that's amazing. So, it is company policy on this channel that I do not disclose my travel plans in advance because, you know, let's face it, you know, I haven't had this happen really, but, you know, things happen where, you know, maybe something comes up at the last minute and you all of a sudden can't go on the trip. So I want to make sure that I'm keeping my plans under wraps and I'm not giving too much away while also going about my day-to-day business and being able to get this trip off the ground and get everything prepared so that I can bring you all the footage that you're accustomed to seeing from these cities that I travel to. So that's how it's been since 2010, and that's how it's going to be going forward. Oh, you'll be amazed. Yeah, I would agree, Deacon. You'll be amazed. It's one of those trips where, so there's like a major metropolitan area that's on the drawing board to be done, and then if the weather's good enough, there are other, satellite metro areas that are not that far away that you could also handle over the course of a few days. So depends on the weather and other factors, but I could really do some damage in a part of the country that I don't really have any coverage for yet. So it's going to be fun. You want to see I-70 in Indiana, huh? So as I said, this is typical of the kind of video that I film because I'm going in this direction, and it's nice to add to the catalog, but it's not something that would be prioritized. So we're on I-70 westbound, starting at milepost 11 and heading towards the Illinois state line, which also, in this part of Indiana, also functions as the boundary between the eastern and central time zones. I turned the sound down so you guys can hear me over all the background noise of the video.
It won't take long to get that done. Again, the only 10 o'clock you got an autograph session with the Indy Lights guys practice.
I think at this point I still had Indianapolis sports talk on. I didn't lose the signal until I was well into Illinois. And when I was in Illinois heading towards St. Louis, I switched over to KMOX. That was the station I had on throughout the St. Louis video series. By the way, speaking of St. Louis, how about the Blues? They were just a win away from the Stanley Cup. I don't want to jinx them or anything, but Game 6 is tomorrow night. They can win their first ever cup tomorrow night at home.
Everything has to be dry. Everything has to be in place. So maybe a little bit of delay in that first practice, but you never know. It's still coming down a little bit now. If it frees up here in the next 20 minutes, it takes about 2 hours and 15 minutes to dry the track. I think we'll get an update here over the next couple of minutes with Doug Bowles. But yeah, I certainly think that there might be a little bit of delay to that practice session.
Well, the big thing everybody's worried about, they want to see the cars at some point, right? And they want to see the concerts. That's what car day's all about. So if it gets nice by around 11, 11:30 noon, with everybody
down
good.
on it in the wet,
Everybody good.
We will be fine today. Don't worry about it. We'll be fine.
I like it, and I'm looking one more time here at the radar. And Tony, you saw something just a moment ago. Yeah.
So through the state of Indiana, I-70 closely parallels or overlaps with US Route 40.
Apart a little bit. So it looked like now there was some lightning. We did hear some thunder. So people are, taking refuge.
And these two routes generally parallel each other for
It should be a short-lived
most of their respective lengths,
through here, and then they'll get to the jet
like
dryer.
all the way east into Colorado, or east into Maryland and west into Colorado.
I know that obviously
These two routes will parallel each other.
and all that good stuff. The less humidity in the air, the better. But as far as what people can do, what they can do, how do they get this track drier a little bit quicker?
It's manpower. It's the trucks going around the track. It's the guys with even the brooms there in the pits to make sure that that's all dry. And like you said, those jet dryers are a jet engine strapped to the back of a truck, basically, that dries the track. So a lot of manpower and a lot of going out and just putting labs, putting the heat on the track, and hopefully it dries up. There shouldn't be any weepers anymore like we see on other tracks.
It's coming down right now.
Another lightning strike out east, and then pouring, absolutely pouring down at the track right now. So yeah, stay safe in your car, and this should pass through here within the next, I would say, 30 minutes or so. I thought everything was going to clear out by 9:30 for sure.
But you should get
For this trip, I was driving a 2018 Ford Fusion, which was very comfortable.
So it may take a little bit longer, but again, it's just going to cool things off for you.
Had a great time with it. It was had no issues with it. It was a very nice ride.
Any cover at this point in time?
I'll tell you what my biggest concern now is all of us leaving the media lot, which is grass and mud, and how brutal that can be. I already saw somebody get stuck in there walking in.
Listening to the radio is really a carryover from my original days when I started filming about 9 years ago. These were the days before smartphones and before things like Google Maps and traffic apps and stuff like that. So when I was in a particular city, the best way to get a feel for traffic conditions on the area freeways was to listen to the news radio stations and listen for the traffic reports. You will find that in cities like New York and Philadelphia, my first cities that I started with, I pretty much had those stations on from the very beginning. And the reason why was because I was listening for traffic updates. It really wasn't to provide any kind of background noise. But it just sort of became something that I was known for over the years. Just, you know, some people put music in the background, other people don't put anything in the background. I just happen to have the radio on as a means of providing something for the listener or the viewer to watch or to listen to. And I can't play music if I want my videos to not be flagged for copyright violations by YouTube. So I almost have my hand forced. It's either don't listen to anything or have talk radio on in the background. Well, if I have my choice between the two, I'm going to pick the news stations rather than the typical FM stations which play music which is flagged by YouTube automatically for copyright violation.
People do handstands on it and everything else. It is a piece of metal that can be fixed. Okay, I'm not asking you to bring it to my snake pit party. I am asking to get on the elevator so I can be back up here to work in a timely manner. And again, the elevator it's a 5 to 10 minute cycle for 4 floors because you got people that won't walk 1 floor.
I drove through a storm on I-55 when I was heading back into St. Louis from Memphis. That was like the very beginnings of a supercell. Like, you could tell it was going to become something that big. The raindrops were like the size of, 50-cent pieces. So I knew that storm was going to be something big, and I got through it before it got really nasty. But these storms in the Midwest seem to blow up out of nowhere. It's really amazing. We've just crossed into the Illinois state line. We've entered the central time zone. 155 miles to St. Louis at this point. Well, yeah, and you don't want to go through the process of, going through and adding music that YouTube is okay with, because that just prolongs the period or the process of editing, which I try to avoid at all costs. So, because I'm a lazy guy. I look for lazy ways. I look for easy ways to do things. So if I can get away without doing any editing at all, that's how I'm gonna roll.
Now the 2-2 pitch. Foul ball. ever play with pitchers who, and I would say that would probably be primarily.
You are not wrong, Deacon. That is true. Alright, so here's a different look at the Poplar Bridge in St. Louis. We're approaching it from Highway 3 northbound in East St. Louis. By the way, I've always been impressed with these signs here. Look at how many shields they cram into each of these. It's very impressive. So you have this shield on the right here is a Great River Road shield. Illinois and Missouri do a very good job of signing the Great River Road Trail, which more or less follows the Mississippi River for its entire length. This is a very nice view of St. Louis from this ramp too. If these trees weren't in the way, it would be outstanding. And here's another trip over the Poplar. This time we're going to continue past the I-55 turnoff, and we're going to exit off across from the stadium, which is the next exit past here. So since I'm showing you this, I can show you. You see on the right here, this is the stub for what used to be the original ramp that took you onto 55 southbound. That ramp was supplanted by the ramp you see today. But they left this little piece hanging here. And we also pass by right next door to Busch Stadium. And we'll take the stadium exit for this video.
Catchers, not much. Really, every now. Let's wake up Laz Diaz now. They're looking. Did he catch it? Did he foul it all?
Now in 2017, if you'll recall, I did do extensive coverage of Columbus, Ohio. And while I was on my way back to the airport on Memorial Day, I filmed this video, which is an extended, basically a freeway tour of the city of Columbus. It mainly follows Interstate 70, 71, and then 670. As I generally head eastbound towards the airport from the western suburbs. The weather was much nicer on this trip than it was at any point on my visit 2 years ago. So I felt compelled to do a video of it just to prove to everybody that the sun does in fact come out from time to time in central Ohio.
Clint Hurdle had come out of the dugout waiting to see what decision would be rendered, and I guess he's satisfied with the decision. He goes on back to the dugout. They used to tell stories about catchers in the old days. I don't know if you've ever played with one. And he's no longer with, I don't know whether Jerry Grody is still alive or not, to be honest with you. But he was Tom Seaver's catcher all those great years when Tom was with the Mets. And if Jerry had a problem with a plate umpire calling balls and strikes, you know where I'm going with this. I do, but go say it anyway. He'd call for a pitch and then not catch it.
So there are a couple of things that you'll notice that are different between this video and the videos of 2 years ago. The most notable change you'll notice is the progress in the construction of I-70 along the south side of the downtown loop, which we'll come up to here in a couple minutes.
And ball 4, and they're loaded. That might be the last 15 throws. Here comes Clint Hurdle. So Peraza extends the inning, and that means that whoever he's hitting against, Nick Senzel, is going to be the tie and run. And now the Pirates will make a double switch. They're second of the game. Josh Bell will leave first base and will be replaced there, I would assume, by the only guy who's able to come off the bench, and that would be Jose Osuna. So this game turning into something of a marathon. Continues to go on as Osuna comes on to play first. Clint Hurdle is finished with the paperwork with Laz Diaz. And
as I said, I've been working on a presentation for the bridges of the Mississippi River. That slideshow is actually already completed, so I'm going to look to do that hopefully next weekend. If next weekend doesn't work, then we'll shoot for the following weekend. It's got to be one of those 2 weekends, because the 2 weekends after that, the last weekend of June and the first weekend of July, I won't be around. I'll be out of town. So it'll be one of those 2 weekends, and I'll make sure that I announce it well enough in advance. We'll be able to get into the bridges in more detail than we were able to with the last 2 presentations. I really wanted to focus on the freeways in these 2. So we'll be able to talk more about the bridges and their history, some of the engineering characteristics of them, and some other interesting stuff. And we'll get to talk about some earthquake engineering, which I know you guys are really excited to learn about. You would not think that the St. Louis to Memphis area would be a haven for earthquake engineers, but that is true. It's very true. So I'm sure we will touch on the earthquake side of things as well.
Threatening here in the bottom of the 8th inning. They're trailing 8-4, bases loaded and 2 outs. Felipe Vasquez, Pittsburgh Pirates closer, is on the mound now for the 21st time of the year. He has 13 saves with a 1.25 ERA.
Yeah, he has really been something for this
New York City.
I mean,
I live near there, so
and if you're thinking long ball, he's given up 2
if I really wanted to film something, I could just get up in the morning and go down and film it. But I see no reason to add any new material to the New York metro area at this point. We already did an extensive revisiting of all the bridges and tunnels last year. There will be a couple of opportunities to add some stuff in that area later this year. Particularly the completed configuration of the Bayonne Bridge in Staten Island. That project is now complete. So I'll be able to showcase that on video at some point later this year.
One out later, a walk to Iglesias, 1 out later, a walk to Peraza, prompting
But other than that, and other than a couple of things here and there won't be a lot of New York area material for the rest of the year. My focus is going to be on, as I said, California, the St. Louis to Memphis corridor, and Mystery City X that is coming in July. Yeah, when I was in Columbus, I picked up WLW out of Cincinnati very well, and I think I caught a couple innings of the Reds-Pirates game in the background. That's what you're listening to.
The only pitch he's thrown remotely close is that first pitch breaking ball. That's right. That was a fastball. I mean, that baby was up and away and not even close to the zone. So Senzel standing outside the right-hand batter's box as Vasquez paws at the dirt on the pitching rubber. And now steps back on. Senzel back in the box. 3-1 to count. And the left-hander winging on to the plate. There's 3-1 pitch. Strike two call, the full count. Tell you what, last year calling a high strike all day long. Now,
yeah, the deal with West Point, I have a policy which is firmly supported by the positions taken by security at the entryways to at the gates to these institutions, that I do not bring my camera within the confines of any of the service academies or any sensitive government property. So you will not see videos inside the campus of West Point. I've covered US 9W and New York State Route 218 in the past, but those roads do not enter the premises of West Point, so those are fair game. But you won't see any videos of West Point proper on this channel. Or hypothetically, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, or any kind of military installation. That's where I draw the line with what I do. I respect the privacy of the U.S. government and its service academies, and respect their right to be quite opposed to the idea of having what may be considered as sensitive locations put on video. So that's my policy, and I'm sticking to it. And by the way, we were just briefly on I-71 northbound, and now we're on I-670 eastbound as we approach Columbus Airport.
Don't be poop, don't be a clown. There's only one Willie.
I mean, I took a picture of Alcatraz when I was in San Francisco. From the other side of the bay, I could see it from where I was standing. That's as close as I got.
Thanks to the HCS Foundation, kids 12 and younger get free. For details, visit redsmusic.org. We're in the ninth. Ronnie Peraldo came on to get the final 2 outs in that 4-run Pittsburgh Pirate 8th inning. Now we'll start from scratch, and he'll get the first baseman, Jose Ozuna. Came in as the part of the double switch in the last inning to play first base, and now batting for the first time today. He takes a strike. The Reds Hall of Fame, you mentioned that. Better put some time away to get in there, because there's
any videos of the Golden Gate Bridge?
I love the baseball card exhibition.
Well, I'm going to let you answer that question. What do you think the answer to
One
that is?
strike. Well, they did an amazing job to make what was already a great hole.
What do you think? You think I got video of the Golden Gate or no? Alright, well there you go. You answered your own question. See that? You don't need my help. You don't need me to tell you. Let's see here. Alright. If nobody's got anything else that they want to see, we'll wrap this up. Otherwise, if you have something you want to see, get in your request now, and we can show that before we sign off.
Traffic wasn't bad this morning. I think a lot of people may be trying to stretch us into a 4-day deal.
A section of I-70 that overlaps with I-57 in Effingham, Illinois, was recently widened to 3 lanes per direction. I believe this work was completed about 3 years ago. That's what's on display in this video.
His White House aides and family should stage an intervention for the good of the country. It escalated as Pelosi taunted Trump at her Capitol Hill news conference, a move intentionally aimed at portraying the president as erratic and upsetting him, according to an individual familiar with Pelosi's thinking. Is this a good strategy, Michael Kelly?
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, Nancy Pelosi is pushing the president's buttons, and it's working. And I think what she's trying to do is expose the president as being even more unhinged than he is. What's interesting to me is we've all seen the president insult people, right? He's done it to his own Secretary of State. He's done it to his own Secretary. I think the list goes on and on.
Now, I never drove this section of interstate before the widening happened, so I don't know what it was like before, but I would say that this is a very nice, very nice section of freeway.
This is a bad person who has a real problem with women. And when he calls her crazy Nancy, that's fine. That's just a child.
The exit numbers during this stretch reflect mileage on I-57, not I-70.
They're not helping the country.
So we have 160 miles roughly to Cairo, and the bridge on the Mississippi that takes you over to Missouri.
And, look, the economy in this country is very strong right now, but we have some real problems that need to be addressed. One of them is our infrastructure. And it would seem to me like infrastructure is the kind of issue that, given a divided government, which we have, that's one area where Democrats and Republicans ought to be able to come together. And, all of this back and forth.
Here's that big cross coming up on the left that somebody
No,
was
John, let's be honest. The
talking
president
about.
has been acting this way for over 4 years, like a child. The Democrats and Schumer have tried to treat him as a president should be treated. The only way to deal with this guy is to get down in the mud, and that's what Nancy Pelosi's doing. And as for the talking focus on infrastructure, if the president truly wanted to focus on infrastructure, he would have shown up at that meeting and sat down. This was a staged event, and he had his little yard.
Yeah, by
sign
this
already
point
on his
in the
podium.
trip, I had switched over to KMOX out of St. Louis, so that's what you're hearing in the background.
Well,
Do you believe that should the Democrats drop all of the investigations in order to move infrastructure forward?
yeah, I mean, I think, look, the investigations are done. The Mueller report,
So this overlap with 70 and 57 lasts for a few miles. You notice the control city for 57 southbound is Memphis.
accomplishing nothing.
And actually that happens as far north as Chicago. The first sign you see for I-57 heading south out of Chicago is for Memphis.
Sit down and work in the best interest of the country, and both sides are not helping.
Congress is doing nothing. Yesterday, Congress passed a disaster relief.
Alright, so that's the Effingham section of I-70 and 57. What else? Anything else you want to see? Memphis is quite a trip from Chicago, and it's mostly bland and rural in character. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up for the night. So, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this live event. And keep an eye out for the Bridges on the Mississippi River presentation. That's going to be... that'll probably be next weekend, but I'll make sure that I announce it ahead of time so that you guys can see it. And we'll be able to talk more about the bridges and all the earthquake stuff. I'm sure that we'll have a lot of fun getting into those topics. So I'm going to sign off here. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys got a good idea for the stuff that I filmed out in the St. Louis area. And we'll be able to show you all the bridges hopefully next weekend. So have a good night, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you all again soon. Later.